My name's Nate. I run Jesus People SF, and today I want to talk about the question of how do you know what commands to obey in the Bible? How do you understand what God expects from you? And when it comes down to it, simply the first 5 books of the Bible have 613 commands. That alone would keep you occupied just learning, even just reading what each of those commands are, would take you some time. And then you'd have to figure out how to do them. And then you add to that the New Testament. And we have to figure out how to sync up what Jesus and the apostles said with what Moses and the prophets said, right? A lot to keep track of unless you understand the simplicity of what God actually requires of us. Now, what does God actually require of us? Well, it's simply one command. There is only one command that God expects of us in any season of the church history, Jewish history, Noahic, pre-Jewish history, antediluvian, I think that means before the flood history. God has only ever expected one command to be obeyed. Let me reveal what command that is from Jeremiah chapter 7. Starting in verse 21, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, add your burnt offerings to your sacrifices and eat flesh. For I did not speak to your fathers or command them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. But this is what I commanded them, saying, obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. And you will walk in all the way I command you, that it may be well with you. Yet they did not obey or incline their ear, but walked in their own counsels and the stubbornness of their evil heart, and went backward and not forward. That was a lot of text. Let's just break it down to the actual command here in the text that God expected of Israel when they came out of Egypt. First, let's just look at the positive command. Obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. That's it. Obey my voice. Obey my voice. Obey my voice. Literally in every season of church history, Jewish history, Noahic history, pre-Noah history, there's only ever been one command, which is obey my voice. And look at the way that God phrases this. He says, I did not speak to your fathers or command them concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. Now, you might be tempted, if you actually have read the Exodus account, to call God a liar in this instance. Why? Because in essence, God is saying there's nothing in all of the Mosaic covenant about burnt offerings and sacrifices. That's not really what he's saying, though. What is he saying when he says, I didn't speak to them or command them concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices? Ultimately, like God set up the Mosaic covenant in the Exodus and as they're heading into the promised land, certainly he did that, and certainly he did talk about burnt offerings and sacrifices. What he's saying is something bigger than did I or did I not give commands about this. The real command is just hear me. The real command is just obey. The real command is just, if I speak, you listen, you act. That is the only real thing God is concerned about. So when he says, do these burnt offerings and sacrifices, what he's not saying is, hey, I'm setting up this system. After I set it up, I'm basically a deist God. It's just like clockwork. You just do your sacrifices and automatically you get good things, right? You never have to check back in with home team or home base. That's not how it works. And so when he's talking to Jeremiah about their behavior, ever since they came out of Egypt, he's saying they did not listen, they did not incline their ear, they stiffened their neck, they did more evil. And he's saying basically, Jeremiah, when you go to talk to them, they're not going to hear you because that's what they've always done. And I hate to say it, but even in the new covenant, most of what's visible of the visible church has basically had the same behavior. Now, let's hone in on this idea that the only thing that God in the old covenant or the new covenant under Jesus in the new covenant requires of people is simply to hear his voice. What do we mean by that? Because obviously we're trying to hold two things at once. Obviously God did command about burnt offerings, but what God is saying is it's not about burnt offerings, right? It's about listening. It's about obeying. When I speak, you act. And the problem here in Jeremiah is God is speaking through Jeremiah, and all they care about, specifically in this particular chapter of Jeremiah, is, the temple of the Lord. That is our safety. The temple. Like you're rubbing some kind of magic rock, right? The magic rock, the temple of Yahweh. But Yahweh is saying, that's not how my religion works. My religion works this way. I speak, you act. I speak, you listen, right? And when you turn it into some system that's autonomous from God, it becomes worthless. It becomes evil. So let's dive more into the idea of when God is speaking, you act. That's the real thing that God commands, not let's observe all 600 commands of Moses and all the commands of the apostles. It's not so much about the letter of the law, although obviously if you are converted and following Christ, you're going to want to know what that is. You're going to want to please him. You're going to want to follow him, etc. But when it comes down to it, this principle that Jesus gives in Matthew chapter 16 is very helpful in helping us understand what it actually means when God says, all I want is I speak, you act. All I want is obey my voice, as he says in Jeremiah 7. So it says here, Matthew 16:3, Matthew, let's start in verse 1. The Pharisees and Sadducees came up testing Jesus. They asked him to show them a sign from heaven, but he replied, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning there will be a storm today, for the sky is red and threatening. Do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but cannot discern the signs of the times? The signs of the times. So what Jesus is basically saying is the Pharisees and Sadducees have a quasi-spiritual discernment. But this discernment is only honed and specialized and keened in on things that affect their earthly state. Why? Because that's all their religion is. Earthliness. The Pharisees and Sadducees had a religion that was only good for the here and now because it had nothing to do with the genuine God of Judaism, the God of the Bible. And so Jesus is saying, look, you are obsessed with the signs of stuff that you know is going to affect your prosperity in this world. You got your eyeballs on that. You got your ears to the ground. You can discern the signs of stuff you think is important and will affect you. But the hypocrisy of the matter is they stand in the place of the teachers of God, but they can't discern the signs of the times. Specifically, for instance, that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. That Jesus was the person speaking with the authority of God, not just the authority of man. Right? And I want to get real specific about the application of hear my voice as the only command that God requires. So, for instance, if you are fresh out of the Exodus and you've just landed in the promised land in the days of Joshua, and you want to know, what does God expect from me? Your job at that point is to listen to the words of Joshua and the words of Moses. This is hear my voice. But when it gets around to the days of Isaiah, what do we have? We have God, for the sake of the hour that Isaiah was in, de-emphasizing a lot of what Moses said because of the hour. What's another way of saying this? Hear my voice. So yeah, God spoke through Moses, but guess what? In the hour of Isaiah and Jeremiah, you need to hearken to God's man, to God's prophet, to what God is doing now, which is why I used the Matthew 16 text because Jesus is speaking to their time. The command of now, the command that God requires right this second. God does not require every command of the Bible now. He requires a discernment, a hearing of his spirit, a hearing of his voice. All I mean by that, by the way, is you've studied your butt off by reading the Bible, and you've tried to apply it. And once you do that consistently, as Hebrews says, your discernment becomes honed and keyed in, and you're able to know what God expects in the moment. And so you can do what Jeremiah says, hear my voice. But here in Isaiah, God basically says that he does not care about his people or his covenant at that time in the sense of just the outward stuff. What are your multiplied sacrifices to me, says Yahweh? I've had enough of the burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fed cattle, and I take no pleasure in blood of bulls, lambs, or goats. When you come to appear before me, who requires this trampling of my courts? In other words, like, even though God says observe the religious holidays, come for assembly, in other words, do sacrifices, there's seasons when it's just not the time for that. And by the way, when is Isaiah speaking? Still in the Mosaic covenant, still in the Old Covenant. And so I've said this many times in many videos. You could say the way Calvinists do, the way Reformed people do, sola scriptura. Scripture alone is our only way of hearing from God, right? Well, if that were the case, then we should just throw this out of our Bibles, Matthew 16, discerning what hour it is, what spiritual hour is required. Because the Pharisees could just say, sola scriptura, Jesus, we just want to listen to Moses. We don't want to listen to you. They don't get off because they say, oh, it's already written. They don't get to do that. Because Jesus, speaking for God, says, it is written, but I tell you, and so on and so forth. But listen also in the days of Amos, he's one of the first written prophets, after Moses anyway. He says, I despise your feasts, Amos speaking for God. And I take no delight in your solemn assemblies, even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings. I will not accept them, the peace offerings of your fattened animals. I will not look upon them. Take away from the noise of your songs to the melody of your harps. I will not listen. But what's this here? Let justice roll down like waters. This is not an affirmation of social justice. This is actually an affirmation of make a right decision in each moment of your life. This is not about some kind of Marxist iteration of what justice is, which is what social justice is. And finally, let's look at Isaiah, the last book of Isaiah. And, Isaiah 1 begins with this kind of talk, and Isaiah at the end, in the last chapter of Isaiah, ends the same way. He says, he who kills an ox is like one who slays a man. By the way, let's just be clear. Moses commanded the people to keep the atonement by killing oxen. He who sacrifices a lamb is like one who breaks a dog's neck. He who offers a grain offering is like one who offers swine's blood. He who burns incense is like one who blesses an idol. What's one way of saying this first part of the verse here? Pretty much everything God commanded in the book of Deuteronomy, you could say, or the book of Leviticus. Basically, Isaiah is saying that those commands ain't for now. Those commands are not hear my voice. What's commanded now is stay away from merely outward religious trash. Even, by the way, if God one time commanded it, okay? And look at what he says about such people who are obsessed with observing merely religious rites and rituals. He says, they have chosen their ways. Their soul delights in what? Wait. I thought it was sola scriptura. I thought it was the once for all delivered scriptures. But no, he calls people who are obsessed with slaying oxen, lambs, and grain offerings and burning incense, all the things that Moses commanded. He calls those people who are obsessed with that in the days of Isaiah when God is telling people to stop obsessing about religion for religion's sake. He's calling them people obsessed with abominations. He's calling them people who choose their own ways, not God's ways, their own ways. And I'm bringing this up because, from time to time, I drop in on internet discussions by my former companions of specifically Reformed Christianity. And man, they are just so locked in their ways. It's really sad that it's sort of like after the temple curtain is rent in the Gospels, right? And then we transition into Acts and the Spirit is poured out. And people just want the old wine of what they're familiar with what they've mastered in seminary, with what they've mastered in their quiet time. It's all about what's comfy, what we know. It's all about the familiar, and it's not about this right here, knowing what times these are, or this right here, obey my voice. And so I guess I leave you with this question. Is your observance of Christian duties, Christian rites, Christian rituals, Christian ceremonies, is this just because we've always done it this way? Or is it because something like this? I commanded them, obey my voice. Obey my voice. Remember, what chapter is this in? This is in the same chapter where God is mocking people, declaring, this is the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh. As though Sunday morning were your protection against the judgments of God. As though Christianing up outwardly were the safety. No, that's never been safe. It's never been safe to just join the fray of some religion that God in the past worked through. But you know what is safe in every season of God and God's people is hear my voice. Hear my voice. So, today, as Hebrews says, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart. Now, what I'm not trying to argue, although I do believe that God speaks outside of the Bible, using non-Bible texts, I do believe he is able to do it. Why? Because we have an example of this in the Old Covenant prophets and in the book of Acts. We have examples of this. So we definitely have the right to say it exists. But that's not what I'm prescribing. I'm not prescribing that you learn to listen for God's small, still voice. What I'm prescribing is that you just become utterly familiar with the Bible so that you are always aware of the generality of what God requires. And then the Spirit of God hopefully will see you perking up your ears at all times to what God has spoken in the Scriptures. And he will help you apply that to your each and every ticking second of the day so that you can discern, as Jesus says, the times, the signs of the times, and so that you can discern. And by the way, when I say signs of the times, what am I talking about? I'm not saying, oh, this lines up with the book of Revelation, chapter this, chapter that. Maybe that would happen, but I'm mainly just trying to figure out, what does God require? What does God want from you now? And that's it. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. It means a lot to me that anyone tunes in and watches. I hope that you tune in, not just I am nothing, but the word is everything. Seriously. And if I've rightly interpreted it, that's the only authority in this video, is the word rightly interpreted. If you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if you have any comments, feel free to leave those. Please, if this video helped you at all, if this was insightful, hit the like button for YouTube to be able to boost this video in the algorithm. This will help other people also be helped by the video. That's the only reason I'm asking. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.